When you turn 18, our society generally considers you an adult. You can join the military, you're eligible for jury duty, you can get that sweet tattoo that we all know you'll regret in 5 years. And of course, you gain the right to vote. That's when you finally get a say in how this country works. But over the past few years, with movements like Black Lives Matter and the March for Our Lives, we've seen young people under the age of 18 put pressure on lawmakers to take action on serious issues that affect them, like police brutality and gun violence. Combine that with the fact that at 16 you can work, pay taxes, and even be tried as an adult for some crimes, and it's pretty obvious that the country's laws have an impact on nearly everyone well before they can cast their vote. Maybe we need to rethink the voting age. Should 16-year-olds be allowed to vote? Okay, so voting may not seem like a big deal, especially since there are a ton of eligible voters out there that don't vote. I'm looking at you, millennials. But it's kind of awesome that in America, voting is a right. I mean, 40% of the world doesn't even have the option to vote, which means they don't have a say in their government. However, the laws governing who can vote and who can't have evolved over time. When the Constitution was ratified in 1788, there was no mention of a voting age. Instead, pretty much every state requires you to be at least 21 and a land-owning white Christian male. No, not Christian Bale. Well, I mean, that works too. By 1830, most states had abolished the property and religion requirements. So if you were white, male, and at least 21, you could vote. Then, in the years after the Civil War, things really started to change. In 1868, former slaves were guaranteed citizenship with the passing of the 14th Amendment. 2 years later, the 15th Amendment guaranteed black males the right to vote, although their voting rights were actively suppressed for decades, and even still today. Then came the women. After years of activism, they won the right to vote in 1920 with the passage of the 19th Amendment. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act prohibited racial discrimination of any kind in voting. So by the late 60s, finally, everyone 21 and over could actually vote in the US. But the journey doesn't end there, folks. The late 60s was the peak of the Vietnam War. The US government drafted thousands of 18 to 21-year-old men. Protesters argued that if you were old enough to die for your country, you should be able to vote in it too. So in 1971, Congress approved and then the states ratified the 26th Amendment, which guarantees voting rights to any American citizen 18 or older. Okay, so why not lower the voting age even lower to 16? Why not keep evolving? Well, going from 21 to 18 is a way easier sell than going from 18 to 16. Some critics say that 16-year-olds aren't mature enough or have enough life experience. After all, most are high schoolers, legally required to attend school and generally are dependent on their family for food, clothing, and shelter. I mean, when I think back to my 16-year-old self and my classmates, do I really trust them to make informed political decisions? The maturity argument isn't just adults throwing shade at the youngins. There is some science to back it up. All parts of the brain don't develop at the same pace. What your brain looks like at 16 will be different than how it looks at 18 or 21 or even 25. So what does that mean for teens? Well, there are basically two different methods that our brains use to understand and process the world. The first is cold cognition, which is normal, everyday decision making that doesn't involve your emotions, like picking between Uber and Lyft. Teens are just fine with cold cognition. Hot cognition, on the other hand, involves emotion, typically a conflict between risk and reward. Research shows that teens often struggle with that, meaning they're more likely to be impulsive and irrational when things get emotional. So if you're a 16-year-old voter entering the booth, which part of your brain are you using? On top of that, there's a trend toward increasing the legal age for things. Over the past decade, states have raised the legal age for things like driving a car and buying cigarettes. North Carolina will no longer charge 16 and 17-year-olds as adults. Allowing 16-year-olds to vote would run against this trend. Those in favor of lowering the voting age point to the fact that if you take a look at some other countries around the world, letting 16-year-olds vote isn't controversial. Argentina, Austria, Brazil, Cuba, Ecuador, and Nicaragua all allow voting at 16. And while in the US, you still need to be at least 18 to vote in federal elections, stuff like voting for president and senators, 3 cities in Maryland have granted 16 and 17-year-olds the right to vote in local elections. Many argue that 16-year-olds should have a stake in the laws that affect them. They go to school, so why not let them vote on school policy? A lot of them have jobs where they get taxed on their earnings without having any voting power to affect change in their government. That's taxation without representation, which, if you remember the Boston Tea Party from history class, was a big reason why we fought the Revolutionary War and created the US. There are also studies showing that it's important to vote in your first eligible election because it sets up voting as a habit. At 18, many are moving out of their parents' homes, they're going to college and taking jobs. Being highly mobile can make it hard to register to vote at a specific address. You're more likely to vote for the first time if you're at home in a familiar place, like a lot of kids are at 16. And there's some real data to back this up. In one of those Maryland cities where you can start voting at 16, about 17% of 16 and 17-year-old eligible voters cast a ballot in the local election. That's about double the 8.5% of eligible 18-year-olds. All right, folks, what do you think? Should 16-year-olds be allowed to vote? Let us know in the comments below. And even if you can't vote, there's a lot of ways to get involved with politics. Young people can motivate their families and neighborhoods through education and community organization. Voting isn't the only way to make your voice heard, people. And hey, if you're a middle or high school teacher, you can get your students talking about this topic on KQED Learn. Check it out, right over there. And if you're a student, you can teach your teacher something by showing this video on KQED Learn. Bonus points for sure, guaranteed. And as always, like, subscribe, tell your friends about us, keep watching our videos, and stay above the noise. Later.